Welcome to Now in Zen, the podcast about microtonal and Xenharmonic music, both national and international, foreign and domestic, past, present, and future. For JI purists, computer geeks, alternative guitarists, and academic aficionados of all ages, from age 8 to 81/64, I'm Stephen Weigel, and this is Now in Zen. Today's guests are Christopher Bailey and Jacob Barton, who are both part of UnTwelve, and they have a UnTwelve camp coming up in 2019 that they would like to talk about, as well as a few other projects. So how about, Chris, you talk about what you've been up to, and then maybe Jacob, you talk about what you've been up to.
I'm Chris Bailey, and I'm a composer living in obscurity here in Boston, Massachusetts, and I would say the vast majority of my music is microtonal or Xenharmonic in some way or another. That's pretty much about me. I think today we wanted to talk about doing microtonal music with, especially with the voice, but with instruments that aren't fretted, where the hard work isn't done for you, so to speak, and
Right.
you have to find your way around all these weird tunings that we like to experiment with. And I guess we're going to talk about some ways of negotiating that.
Chris, before the show, you were kind of saying, "Oh, I'm a musical architect."
Yes.
Care to clarify that idea?
Yeah. So I guess my happy space is kind of putting things in time, musical events, without but not doing it in real time. So I like just building a piece, like say, oh, I'm going to start with this ending, and then this stuff's going to come in the middle, and then I'll do this stuff, and then maybe, or sometimes I'll compose a piece by writing like 20 small fragments or sections, and then figuring out what order they should come in, and that sort of thing. A huge majority of my pieces, I do a lot of pre-compositional planning. That's kind of how I like to work. It doesn't mean that I don't listen to what I'm doing. I think when people work that way, people are like, oh, well, I just prefer to use my ear. And it's not like I don't use my ear. It's just that comes into the process at a certain point. Typically, I'll lay out like a fairly detailed structure, and then I kind of use that as a basis for what you might call improvisation, but like I'll have a bunch of notes that I have to use in a certain passage, and I'll try all different ways of using them, spacings, registrations, dynamics, till I get something that really excites me. I'll work with that. And that's kind of the way I wrote the piece I'm going to play today. So
would you call that something like serialism, or
I often
is it a little bit different?
I often use serial techniques, although not necessarily. It's not necessarily serial techniques that I use to generate those structures, but often is. And yeah, that's how I approach it, as kind of like give me some material. Actually, I often think of it as a junk sculpture.
Yeah.
So like, give me some junk and I'll make something out of it. And so I just like working that way, trying to make something beautiful or interesting or surprising out of just bric-a-brac or random stuff.
That's really fascinating. And I definitely felt that way about the piece that I played with you at UnTwelve, I think 2016. I went to UnTwelve camp then, and people were showing off their compositions and performance abilities, and often doing both and playing new instruments. It was a really exciting place. And I think your composition that I played used, I think it was the centaur scale.
Yeah, it was just intonation.
Yeah. There's something really special about that scale. I think Craig Grady came up with it, and it has a lot of unique intervals in it. Jacob, maybe you can chime in here.
Well, actually, what I really like about, just to say one thing, what I like about combining serialism with just intonation is serial structures give you these kind of random collections of notes, but the JI says, oh, look, there's that D and E flat that are going to make that really nice dissonance against each other, or there's this collection of notes happens to include the what do you call it, 4, 5, 6, 7 chord on C, which is just in that scale, and
Right.
and so you can take advantage of that while you're composing with it, and it kind of gives things more character than if you're working like an equal temperament where it's kind of more neutral in a way. So I've kind of, in the last few years, I've become fond of doing just intonation serialist stuff, even though it's somewhat counterintuitive to work that way.
So when we were talking about compositional technique, Chris, you mentioned things about just intonation, its character, how you like to use serialism. I guess I would say that I like to use equal temperaments only because I think they're easy to explain, not because they're necessarily more exciting than just intonation. I really like just intonation too. I will say though, like in equal temperament, you can sort of get a small difference in character between keys if the tuning isn't exactly flawless, but that's not something you get on synthesizers very often. Like, sometimes I stretch the octaves in my equal tunings a little hair, so they still all sound the same, but it's really interesting when you can play instruments in the real world and you have to sort of find those tunings yourself. You get these, like, tiny little imperfections and variations in character that aren't as contrasting as I don't think, but they certainly lend this sense of realness to the sound that you don't get otherwise. It's kind of like the difference between listening to a lot of pop music and hearing it being played.
Well, so one of the in that piece I did in Centaur, is basically a 12-tone kind of serialist structure, but then I was realizing it with JI, and sometimes I go off the map, off of Centaur, and use like a 13th harmonic or something like that when it seems appropriate. But what was I going to say?
That's a great method.
What I was going to say is, so I'm using a 12-tone structure, but JI sounds. But it's occurred to me that you could do a piece in 11-tone equal, but realize it as JI, or do a piece in 19 equal and realize it with different JI scales or something. So, there's no reason why to start with 12, except that we're all used to it. But
yeah, that's interesting. I've thought of doing that, but I feel like that locks me into one key, and maybe I just haven't gotten adept enough at navigating sort of the outer reaches to really know what's out there. I mean, I feel like with equal temperament, I can get used to a system pretty quickly, and with JI, I feel like I have to spend a lot more time with it to really get to know it, assuming it's not very modal or static in a drone-based way.
Well, what what's his name said? Western music is so fast because it's out of tune, and so for efficient tonal production, 12 equal and other equals are really efficient, right?
I don't know if Kyle Gann said that or someone else.
One of his mentors, I suspect.
I think it was Ben Johnston who said that, actually.
Yeah, it is Ben Johnston.
Terry Riley, actually.
Shoot, it could have been, yeah.
Guess the microtonal quote attribution.
Yeah.
Time to play. And
someone will email in with the correct attribution.
I'd like to...
I'm sure.
Be really snooty about it.
I'd like to highlight two connections. One being 12 unequally spaced tones, where you have a 12 per octave tuning, but it's a calculated detuning. This used to be called temperament, but now we're doing all kinds of other things that are not just trying to make major keys in all the happy places. And I've heard it called clown tone, where you're designing a scale that will play on a Halberstadt keyboard. So I would consider Centaur, which is a 12 note JI tuning. I would consider it a clown tone tuning. And incidentally, I Am Short, a song that we're going to try in a bit, it also happens to use 12 notes of JI.
I think Centaur actually there's also a 19-tone version of it. If you look on Craig Grady's Centaur website, which those of you who are listening, you just Google Centaur tuning and it comes right up.
It's great.
But anyway, this totally isn't something we were going to talk about on this episode.
Right, we just kind of got into it because it was pretty fun. I mean, JI is definitely good for singing. I was going to talk a little bit about some singing techniques that I use, at least the general ones, and then we were going to go into more specific songs. So the three of us each have a song to share, and I assume the song that we're each sharing is both like, or not both, but we're all sharing a song that we made, except I think, Jacob, your song is by Andrew Heathwaite or something.
That's correct. It will be a cover, yes.
Yes, very cool. I love doing microtonal cover songs. Since my keyboard is in 15, I'd love to do a Mizerian Porcupine Overture cover. I've also wanted to cover Aaron Johnson's The Juggler, which if you haven't heard it, it's a piece in 19, tone equal temperament, that's really chromatic, but the triads flow really nicely. That piece definitely represents like a lot of what I'd like to do in that tuning. So, yeah. Anyway, I was thinking, well, maybe I could talk about some techniques, and you two could talk about like whether you agree with them or your experience with them, things like that. Because I don't feel like they're very standardized. And even when people talk about Xenharmonic ear training, they just bring up software and they don't bring up how they do it. I mean, of course, a lot of it is learning by rote, but there are all these tricks that you can use that I guess aren't widely discussed. Like Jacob, what kind of tricks do you use when you have to do things like sing in 15 tone equal temperament, for example? If you have done that, you probably have.
In 15, you know, you got to get the 5, which is like we ha. Kind of difficult to get, but you kind of just have to make enough melodies in 5 where.
You're talking about the 5 equal subset?
Yeah. Like to navigate those intervals, that's where I begin in terms of 15. And the first resonance that I really latched onto when I was playing around in 15 was a particular voicing of a chord, which is used heavily in my Xenharmonic variations on a theme by Mozart, variation number 3 and 15 equal. I approach music as a sort of a tapestry. And I'm always weaving different things together and saying, oh, my melody connects to this other melody I wrote or this other melody that someone else wrote. And
that's a really cool approach. I sometimes use quotations similarly, but I don't think I use as many different sources as you do yet.
I think sometimes I try to get as close as I possibly can to plagiarism without approaching it. Like the limit as X approaches plagiarism.
Someone should write an equation for that. I'm kind of working on it myself.
Can you play the theme and then play the variation that you're talking about?
All right, yeah.
Let's go ahead and hear that.
Theme. Mozart, K1. I feel like Mozart's mad at me right now. I'll make it up to him in the long run. And then we get a very dissonant, jarring 13 and a very polytempic 14. The kind of the 5 of the 14 equal into the 1 of the 15 equal at 2 minutes and 22 seconds.
Oh wow,
Yeah.
that's fascinating. So for the variation, it sounds to me like the tonic chord is sort of like, G major, but then you've got the interval that splits the minor third in half being used as a melodic.
Yes, precisely.
Yeah, you've got that, and it has a very nice distinctive sound.
2/15 of an octave, 160 cents. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's cool is it starts on the 12 equal major third, the regular 400 cent. So you're on G whatever, bum, and you sing bum bum, just regular, and then you go up Xenharmonically from there. So it's a nice kind of point of departure.
I've always thought about that with 15-tone equal temperament and 9-tone equal temperament. Whenever I use them, I'm like, there could be some interesting transfer between the tuning systems. By the way, transfer refers to changing tuning system mid-piece. It's also been called polymicrotonality, although polymicrotonality might connote multiple systems at once being heard at the same time, whereas transfer would be more like one system moving to another. So,
I've done multiple systems at once, but I haven't done consecutive.
Jacob, would you say that you have done that a lot in your work? Because with the Mozart pieces you just played, you were mentioning different equal temperaments there, and I'm not sure I really understood how you did all the pieces. Maybe you'd like to explain to the listeners how the variations were constructed, what equal temperaments they use.
Well, there's basically now a category of tuning surveys where you you do a set of pieces in a set of tunings, and you try to say, oh, here's the landscape. Iglesia-Jones did it, Cryptic Ruse did it with a map of an emotional landscape. And he actually he did like all the equal temperaments between blah and blah, and he also happened to match the time signatures with the tunings in that case. When I did foum, or Xenharmonic variations on a theme by Mozart, the theme is in 12 equal tones per octave. Theme is in 12, and then I wrote the 19-tone variation first, and then I filled in the rest later, 13th through 18. And the progression makes for actually a very jagged journey, because they're not ordered in such a way that...
It's not like they get more dissonant.
They're mathematically ordered. And then I did another survey called Moods, exploring Ivor Dareg's articulation that each tuning has a certain sonic fingerprint to it. And that one actually starts on 1 EDO and goes through 13 EDO. Yeah, and that's for 3 keyboards.
Wow, that's very ambitious. You've done a lot of those.
Just those 2, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like 2 7-minute pieces.
I've sort of done that with my 6 macrotonal etudes, which is a twin companion to Easley Blackwood's 12 microtonal etudes. I'm waiting on actually notating 2 of them before I release it to the public, but they're definitely a great exploration, and I feel like it's definitely easier to explore a tuning's character the less notes it has. But
what tunings are your macrotonal etudes in?
They are in the tunings below 12, discounting trivial EDOs and multiples of 12. So it's everything below 12 that skips 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. So it's 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11.
See, I think 6 deserves some love. I do.
Oh yeah, I love 6, I've just heard it before, so it doesn't sound Xenharmonic to me at all. But it's really great. I mean, it's good usage. It's kind of like 5 EDO, where if I'm using it, I sort of feel like I want to go somewhere else pretty quickly. But 5 EDO maybe seems a little bit more novel. I guess my ear is weird because it gets used to 5 EDO more than 7 EDO, and whenever I sing microtonal scales, I try to use techniques that either revolve around things that people know from 12-tone equal temperament, or I try to use 5N and 7N to sort of inform an understanding of the thing.
There are people who would claim you cannot sing 5 EDO because it is not just. So,
well, that's kind of stupid. You can sing anything.
Well, let's hear some 5 EDO right now.
Let's see if I can do it. I'll let you pick the note that I get to start on.
All right. G.
It's kind of close. I feel like there's a little bit wrong with that. Whenever I sing a 5 EDO scale, if I'm just thinking of notes as like 1, 2, 3, and I am aiming for that 3 note. I always aim for that really low so that the distance between 3 and 4 is like really big, because I know that my tendency when I play along with it and sing it, I'm just like correcting basically.
I guess the biggest advice that I would have for singing or for flexible pitch is have a fixed pitch reference instrument that you can listen to. Like, that's how I learned, is just I plunked along with the keyboard, and like, yeah,
it's really, really helpful.
If you had a marimba to play with, it would just get so much easier that way, you know?
Yeah, it's always good to be comparing yourself to the real thing. I always use the synth when I'm like learning intervals by rote, or like I'm learning melodies that I wrote by rote.
Mm-hmm.
And by rote just means, of course, that if you play it, you just sort of remember it and sing it back. So the question is, can you come back to it and remember it pretty well? And that's sort of a test of your long-term memory skills. I'd say I can remember it pretty well if there are some anchors that help me out. And anchors are usually things like really distinctive triads. It may or may not be justly tuned. It may just be something that is easy to remember because it's so unique, or maybe it is something close to a justly tuned major chord.
Mm-hmm.
Or I will provide like guiding tips for myself to aim a certain way, like in 5-tone equal temperament. In any scale where there's something Xenharmonic in it that you will often miss, that's like the thing that you need to remember and work on, right? It's like in 5-tone equal temperament, you have 240 steps that are adjacent, and if you sing them just right, they can sound a little bit minor 30 because you're used to the pentatonic scale, even though it's so low compared to, say, 300 cents. So you want that distance between the 4th and the 5th, perfect 4th and 5th from the root, to sound like it could be a little bit minor 30. That's kind of what I'm telling myself. As long as I know the structure of it and there are only 5 notes, it's not as hard. I feel like 7 EDO is a lot harder. When I'm singing 7 EDO, whenever I am going for the 3rd between the 4th, my tendency is to sing the 3rd to the 4th as like a minor 2nd, even though I've pushed the 3rd down so much that it's actually a neutral 3rd. So it's like if I were to sing along with a scale like day 1, singing along with a scale, taking the scale away, and trying to sing it on my own, and finding out like what I do wrong, and then always thinking of that wrong thing, kind of like gets it into the right territory. That's sort of where like I started. I don't know if that's something that you do, Jacob, or
yeah, maybe. I'm not totally articulate on what I do, and I think that I really appreciate your work to kind of get people to make explicit their processes.
It's hard to think of sometimes because, like, I guess you and I and Chris were kind of like used to just doing the work, and you know, since we can do it for ourselves, we might not have to explain it to other people so much. But I do feel like those pedagogical tricks need to be explained at least a little bit. I don't think there's almost any explanation out there.
I'm just tuning up my Halberstadt over here.
Nice. Is that your piano tuning?
This is my Alesis QS8 playing a piano tech patch.
So, Steven, you were going to play one particular piece that you had, like that was a vocal thing that kind of employs these, or where you employed these tricks that you're talking about?
Yes, although I'd say if you want to know more about my tricks, you should go to my YouTube channel. Among correcting for the mistake that you always make, there's also the idea of approaching a destination, recognizing small pitch differences with static ear training, and knowing when to like disturb your context. With that last one, it's about, like, let's say you're playing in 5-tone equal temperament. When should you switch back to like the 12-tone equal tempered pentatonic scale and start singing that in your ear training journey? I sort of discuss like when you should and shouldn't do that based on what you're getting used to. Although, of course, what you think is Xenharmonic and what you've been exposed to is highly subjective and very interesting. What I'm actually playing right now is a little ending segment of something I wrote in 20-tone equal temperament. which is quite underexplored, I would say, and I love it. If I try to think of a Xenharmonic melody in my head, it often ends up being something around 20. Although I thought of one the other day that was in 23. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the little ending part, which is sort of this like choral tag. And I don't think it sounds like JI necessarily, but maybe you perceive some locking and ringing or some smoothness that would make you think it could be rendered as like a JI version of itself, like you were talking about earlier, Chris. So it's not exact, but like it's close enough to count as 20. So I was using a nonatonic scale, a 9-tone scale for it. So let's see if it'll play. Liar, you liar, liar! Do you know what happens to people who lie? Do you know what happens to people who lie? They die alone. Yeah. So,
nice.
Thanks. Yeah, so for the last chord there, it's a very unusual resolution, and I'm playing with the listener's expectation of, let's see, I guess it's not really, it's like a small major second, being used to act like a major second, but it falls short of the notes that you would expect it to fall on. And, this scale, 3/20ths, which would be 180 cents. So I'm using the 180 cent interval mostly, and then I'm also using the 60-cent interval. So you can imagine that if you had a major 7th in 20-tone equal temperament, maybe you could have that as being, well, 1,200 cents minus 60 twice, which would sound, that would sound a little bit narrow. But then if you just had an octave and went down one 20 equal note on the top one, you get something that's really dissonant, slightly more dissonant than the major 7th you're used to hearing. So that's the major 7th that I'm using in both of these chord progressions at the end.
That one right there, Steven?
What was that, Jacob?
This one right here? That 7th?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that was really quick. So here's the track again, if I can get it to the right point.
What happens to people who lie? Do you know what happens to people who lie? They die.
Those are just arpeggiations of the major chord, and then something that sounds a little bit augmented, but then...
You can hear that down there, the top notes are resolving down, but because the 20 equal tones are short of the unisons, it's like the 240 cent tone above the tonic resolves down to something that's 60 cents above, while the perfect fifth does a similar trick. There are two things that can sound like perfect fifths in 20-tone equal temperament. You can either have the 720 cent perfect fifth, or you can have the one that's a 20 equal step above it, and I'm actually sort of looking on the wiki right now to see what that would be.
That's like twice the Xenharmony if you have two bad fifths, right?
Well, right, I think that's one of the most Xenharmonic sounds you can get, because I think even in a lot of Xenharmonic music, people are really, really used to having one kind of fifth. Here, I see it on the wiki. It's a 660 cent fifth and a 720 cent fifth. So, those two... Yeah, it's weird because you'd think 660 wouldn't count, but you can make it count by how you approach it melodically and what people are used to. So that's really most of what I'm doing.
Battaglia has done tons of work on this categorical perception phenomenon, where he can get, say, a 225 instant interval to sound like a minor third.
Yeah, and that's even lower than 240, which we were talking about earlier as being able to be a little bit minor 30.
Really stretch it, and especially if you put in partial stretching in that mess,
Oh, yeah. Something I haven't done nearly enough, but yeah.
That's what, that's also like if you're doing like a 12-tone piece that you realize with just intonation, that can get really interesting there because you've got like maybe a major second or a minor second that, or I guess a major second that sounds like a minor third in a certain context, and like you can play all kinds of interesting games there. So
yeah, that's a really cool idea, and I think that would be a good idea to recommend to newcomers to microtonality, using keyboard formations that have 12 notes in them so that you can sort of retain the octaves with your keyboard interface. In fact, Chris, I don't know if you know this, but I've started a new work group recently, and you all on the podcast can be free to join it too. It's a non-12N practical tunings work group. Usually it's really easy to double a 12-tone instrument and get quarter tones, but since a lot of people do that, I'm interested in like trying similar techniques, but for really radically Xenharmonic tunings. So 12-note things that can be played on a keyboard are great contenders, of course. So yeah, that might be something you're interested in. Interested in joining. It's just a Facebook group right now.
Wait, so you're working with instruments that are 12 keys, or you're interested in instruments that are not 12 keys, that are like 19 keys or something like that?
I'm interested in practical implementations of tunings that aren't multiples of 12. So, like, things that you could...
UnTwelve.
Right, sort of, yeah. Although, of course, when you get higher into the 12Ns, things still sound really Xenharmonic if you do it right, but then you get a lot of notes. But, of course, you can use subsets and things like that. I'm not necessarily banning anyone from posting 12N things. I just think that there are some opportunities that we could be taking advantage of. For example, since the whole tone scale is a part of 18-tone equal temperament, with some fairly easy retuning and specification, you could write a lot of guitar pieces in 18 just using guitars in 12-tone equal temperament. So that's mostly what I'm thinking of, but I'm also thinking of things that use like 12-note scales of any kind, because those would fit to the keyboard. Things that you could hand somebody who's not used to microtones and be like, well, if you just tune it this way with something you already have, then you can play microtones.
The useful word to insert here is paucitonal. I think a coinage by Margot Schulter.
Yeah, you should explain that word. That's a fascinating word.
Paucity, from a Latin root, few, like fewness of tones, or poorness, poverty of tones. We don't have enough tones, or we don't have the right ones. Like, it's a very sad situation. A paucitonal.
Where are the tones?
Unless you write something in 1EDO, and then it's great.
You can't just write off a tuning as paucitonal. It's more situational than that. It's like, well, this piece needed more than 12 per octave, but the composer didn't have it, and it kind of shows. You could kind of make that kind of argument for something. I don't know.
It's interesting.
I think there are some like
people struggling with, people like just kind of banging their head against the wall of the system. I had a friend who told me that my string quartet, which is called Stuck, it does that in a major way.
I think there are Indian ragas that are just like maybe 5 notes. So you can do a lot.
I'm not talking about the number of notes. I'm talking about like when the number of notes is insufficient for the compositional intent.
Oh yeah, that's an important distinction to make. It's interesting because there are a lot of composers who never intend to use more notes.
What don't you have to adjust your intent? I mean, what I kind of don't get that.
We do adjust our intents to the available language, but I'm trying to highlight moments when a composer might maybe be unconsciously thinking, dang it, I wish I had more than 12 notes. Or even, people like Ligeti, he'll deliberately set up the constraint where, okay, my right hand is in black keys and my left hand is in white keys. And I wouldn't call that a situation of paucitonality.
But he might wish at some point that they both had 7 notes or something.
I wonder what his music would sound like on that Jorgensen temperament that has 7 equal on the white keys and 5 equal on the black.
Yeah. That would be really interesting.
Ask a Xenharmonist. Dial that one up. Yeah.
Yeah. I know that when I was a composer, I definitely got bored with using 12 notes in sort of the same ways, and I felt like there should be more notes, but I didn't necessarily think that microtonality was the solution to that for a long time. I was like, well, if I order things in 12 equal in a more interesting way, I can kind of like avoid straight atonality as well as avoiding just tonality or the tonal system in general. There are various states of in-between that you can navigate to make things interesting. But then I think the real issue comes in when you actually want small steps. Like a good example would be if you want a speaking part and maybe you want to notate that in music. Whenever I hear 12 equal composers do that, it's always wrong, or at least it sounds stilted and weird because they're not taking advantage of the full pitch continuum.
Right.
And John Schneider's really good at doing music that, where you can hear those small little cracks.
And if you're just talking like a 70-cent expressive Pythagorean semitone kind of level, you can get that, and singers go toward that a lot, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Violinists do a lot of that kind of thing. That color.
Yeah, absolutely.
How to notate it and get it is another matter. And I saw a really interesting case of somebody interpreting Feldman's work. I want to say it was a cello solo. He was using...
Oh, I think you're thinking of Mark Sabat.
Oh, well, he's done some more explicit work in that, but Feldman wrote stuff that used, the extended Pythagorean chain, like double flats and double sharps, and,
Right, but Mark Sabat played Feldman piece with, I think it was like 70 cent, approximately, minor seconds. Because Feldman will write, like, double flats and double sharps where it makes no sense, if you're just in a 12 tone. And so, and he talked very unexplicitly about maybe you could play around with that microtonally at some point. So there's a recording I have of the piece For John Cage. I think it's with Sabat and a pianist named Clark. And he definitely he zens that piece up. It's pretty nice, I think. I've of course met people who think it's heinous, but I thought it worked really nice. They played really well. It doesn't sound out of tune. It sounds like intentional. So
That's fascinating.
yeah,
I haven't heard those.
Can I play a one more selection of my own to kind of close this section out?
Sure, and then we can move on to Chris's piece.
sure.
So, have you guys checked out Saturating the Riverbed? It's on one of my older pages.
I don't know whether I've heard that one.
I haven't heard that.
It's a round or a canon in 12 parts where the key, it's a kind of a Dorian melody that gets transposed into all 12 keys. So,
Can you post the link?
I will play it and post a link later.
Saturating the riverbed of unconsciousness, she delivers a non-horizontal smile
riverbed
in the pizza
of
commercial
unconsciousness.
of
She
a
delivers a
ballroom.
non-horizontal
Saturating the
smile.
riverbed.
Saturating
Of
the
unconsciousness.
riverbed
She
of a
delivers a
ballroom.
non-horizontal
Saturating the
smile. She
riverbed.
delivers a non-horizontal
Saturating the
smile
riverbed.
in the pizza
Saturating
commercial
the
of
riverbed.
a ballroom. Saturating the riverbed. In the pizza commercial, she delivers a non-horizontal smile. She delivers a non-horizontal smile. Of a ballroom. Saturating the ballroom. Saturating the saturating the ball of unconsciousness. Delivers a non-horizontal smile. The pizza She delivers a non-horizontal smile. She delivers a non-horizontal smile. In the pizza commercial. She delivers a non-horizontal smile. In the pizza commercial. She delivers a non-horizontal smile. Dream. In the pizza commercial of a ballroom. Dream.
Wow. That's incredible. There's so much vitality there, and I didn't get the impression that it was chromatic at all, interestingly.
Yeah, it was basically like in the middle where it's saturated, it's like every tone at every eighth note. I don't know, I haven't analyzed it exactly.
Oh, sorry.
Wow.
What tuning was that in? Was that?
I mean, that's me singing freely, but trying to do 12 equal.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that's interesting. So maybe you
Yeah, it didn't sound
sort of
super
got
zen,
different
but-
values at a few points. Yeah.
Insufficient Zen.
I don't know if it was insufficient. No, it was definitely sufficiently zen, but
Well, let me tell you, that was not paucitonal. No lack of tones there. That's great. Well, yeah, it must have taken a lot of work to make that. I'd want to make things like that where I'm singing all the parts. I kind of want to do a big 31 equal song that sounds really beautiful and maybe get Jacob Collier's attention. We'll do it eventually.
So, Stephen, this is an aside. I don't really know even if it's appropriate here, but your voice is very trebly and tinny to me, and
Yes.
I feel like you're maybe cultivating that intentionally, or or it's just part of your sound that you're trying to work with. What's your understanding of that?
I mean, I've always just had kind of a high nasal voice. I think it actually gets higher every year. So I'm just kind of embracing it.
Have you worked with overtone singing?
I haven't tried it. I don't feel like I can really nail it, but perhaps some other time when I am interested, I will get into it. I do know that I've been experimenting with more and more voice manipulations because I don't want my voice to sound the same every time I sing a song. And I have sort of a sufficient and complex number of them that I can make things sound different. And my voice does really well if I speed it up a major second's worth of.
Interesting.
Yeah, it sounds still like somebody is singing it and not like a chipmunk. So I use that on my Christmas album a little bit, and I also have some fun delay and reverb tricks that I use with panning. So I've gotten really good at making my voice sound a certain way, but I can't make it sound not like my voice, I guess.
I guess there's a whole crossover from tuning into timbre, and there's ways of if you're trying to sing a major third flat and just to 5/4, you can try darkening the vowel on what you're singing and that kind of trick.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have done that many times in singing to aim for a different pitch. In fact, sometimes I think I do it unconsciously.
Yeah.
So now that we've been talking about different types of singing, maybe we can listen to Chris's piece. I think it's a choral thing, right, Chris?
Yeah, so I thought I would talk a little bit about how we did it. So I wrote, this is just a fully scored piece, and I got together some people, which included Jacob, Barton, Elizabeth Adams, a friend of mine, Ramin Arjomand, Beth Griffiths, who at least at one point was a pretty well-known singer in Germany way back in the day, who did new music stuff, and I think she may have premiered, I don't know whether she premiered the Feldman Three Voices piece, but I think she may have done the first performance of it at full length or something, because there's something weird with that piece where it was too long to fit on a CD, so they had to sing it at a faster tempo so that it would fit on a CD, but she did a recording of it that was at the correct tempo. Anyway, so we went into a studio to record this piece. It's in 17 equal. The technique I thought of here was break the parts separately, tenor, soprano, alto, bass, and I had backing tracks to sing along with. And the idea was I would take maybe one or two measures at a time, and we would loop them. The hope was that gradually, as it looped, they would sing more and more in tune. And then at the end of the process, I would take maybe the last 3 or 4 takes and put them on top of each other, and then I get the choral effect.
Oh, cool! A little bit of a detuning chorus.
So I get both. So out of that whole technique, I get both the chorusing effect and hopefully people singing it relatively in tune, because they've already repeated that phrase 20 times or whatever.
I do that a lot with my own vocals, double tracking. Yeah.
Yeah, so I can play you. I'll play you like one little excerpt. I'm going to play you the first 2 takes of this, and then I'll play you the last 2 takes. I was listening to this morning. They actually weren't that bad even the first time, so it's not like a dramatic difference. But and then I'll play you the chorused version of the same little excerpt. Number 2, yeah, it's on SoundCloud. I'm gonna, before I play the whole piece, I'm just gonna play these little things from my mix. This is the first 2 takes of this passage.
The ground is speckled with
And now I'm going to play the last 2 takes of that same passage.
The ground is speckled with.
Huh.
The ground is speckled with.
So then I'm going to play you the soprano part, all mixed together at that point in the piece.
The ground is speckled with.
And of course, that's part of a large chorale texture there. So yeah, so that's kind of the technique we use. The editing afterwards was extremely intensive. There's probably 4,000 fades.
Oh my god!
And like splices, and because I wanted to get all the consonants exactly lined up, but that's actually going back to that comment about being a musical architect. I kind of like that kind of intensive work where you're just fiddling with these little details and getting everything just right. That's something I enjoy doing a lot. So. And then the result is it's pretty cool. So I don't know if we just want to listen to the piece or if you have any questions.
Were the singers singing it at the same time? Did they like come in on each part sort of like a canon and then sing the ostinato over and over again? I thought that was the harmony was very interesting, like really Xenharmonic. So I guess I'm also wondering if you're using perfect fifths in a lot of that.
This piece was also written, like, I think I randomly generated a 17-tone row, and then there's like maybe, I guess it's very simple deployment, like each part sings some transformation of the row, probably also randomly generated. And then, yeah, I look for familiar things between the parts, like triads and Phrygian scales and whatever. And then I emphasize those things as I compose out the music, and then I try to work in like a shape to the piece, and so that's what goes into the rhythm and the kind of relative dissonance of the harmony. I also love voice crossing, like if someone's holding an A, for example, and another voice will sing the B flat against that, and then move down to a G sharp. Or, of course, if you're in a microtonal temperament, you might go from B flat to A flat against the A. Or you might go from the A flat to the G sharp against the A or something, and you get all kinds of interesting little, just kind of exploring the beauty of those dissonances, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's part of what I was hearing. I definitely like doing voice leading tricks like that. And I think I've got the beginning of your little thing. It's like do 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 do. Are those like just alternations between the diatonic semitone and the chromatic semitone? And ends in a perfect fourth?
It's basically 2 chromatic semitones and then 2 diatonic. It's basically G sharp, A, B flat, A sharp, B, C.
Oh, okay, wow.
So there's a little switcheroo between the B flat and the A sharp.
Yeah, because like B flat actually goes up to A sharp, but if you don't incorporate any half flats or half sharps, it doesn't look that way because the diatonic and chromatic semitones are switched in 17 from where they usually are in mean tone.
In 17, A half sharp is B flat.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and
exactly.
the tenor part of that section is going E flat, D sharp, D flat, C. So it's like E to E flat and then to D sharp. D sharp is higher than E flat, and then jumping down to D flat, which is actually a bigger interval than it looks like on paper. And
one thing I'm interested in, and might make this kind of project easier in the future, is like just intonation interpretations of such pieces.
That's why I got into just intonation recently, is because I sort of think of, okay, I'm writing a piece in an equal temperament, but what if we tuned all these sonorities justly, or some of them, or whatever?
It's also interesting that just intonation provides an explanation for which chords gel more to the ear.
Yeah,
so
absolutely,
that can,
Sometimes though, sometimes like I like the sound of like a cluster. Exactly. So I like those thick dissonances sometimes too. They have their own charm.
Absolutely. And you can get a lot more combinations of like different steps in dissonance with other tuning systems. It's objectively just not enough to play with only two kinds of second.
Yeah. So I don't know, maybe I'll just play a few minutes of the piece and
I'd love to hear it. I've only heard it once, so I definitely need to hear it again.
Okay. to stop there, and that's about 2/3 of the piece or so, and the listeners can hear the whole thing on SoundCloud. Just go to SoundCloud, Zip Zap Poo Zoo, and look for Lost and Found Things too. There's actually also there's 2 performances online. There's that recorded version, studio recording. There's also a live performance that Jacob did with a group, I think down at Rice, which is pretty darn good. I mean,
17-tone piano project, phase 4, I believe, and that's
and that's on my SoundCloud too.
I think that one's on the wiki, and that's on the SoundCloud too.
Yeah, it's on my SoundCloud too. So either of those places. But yeah, they did pretty amazing. They were all wearing headphones, I think, and listening to the guide tracks. But
yeah, we had to bring in. We got in trouble for basically ripping out the guts of the electronic music studio because we had to have like this big, you know,
Nice.
the big interface with all the different headphones. Yeah.
That's how they remember you. Well, that's fantastic, Chris. I love your use of the 17-tone harmonies. I actually sung something in 17-tone without the guide tracks. Aaron Johnson has this piece called Alleluia. There's a lot more perfect fifths in it than your piece.
Yeah, it's more of a neo-medieval, yeah.
Right, so the singers can aim for that, and you don't really need the guide track as long as you know it. So, me and 2 other singers from Ball State, who hadn't really done microtonal singing before, were able to do it. And I used the Axis 64 to audition the sounds and learn things by rote and all of that. It's actually on my YouTube channel, and I'll actually send you the link right now. Actually, we could listen to it a little bit on the podcast, and I could talk about just the beginning, because I do have something to say about that. On my YouTube channel, you can go to Xenharmonic New Music Showcase 2018, and basically on it are all the pieces that are live that also aren't just fixed media that's played.
Starting now.
Okay. So now we've heard the beginning of that. You can hear that the harmony makes use of not only perfect fifths, but also some major seconds. In fact, some of them adjacently between the singers. Like the soprano is singing a major second going up in melody, as I am also doing that, a major second below her. At the beginning, where we have that open perfect fifth, and then we go to sort of like a linear sounding chord below it and come back up, I emphasized making the diatonic semitones small enough in the top so that we would really get the 17-tone effect, because you can play that analogously in 12 equal, right? I think I can play it on my piano over here. Like if I start on an open fifth and I have that's sort of the idea. It's E, B, E, and then the top 2 notes are going down, and then the bottom note is going up 1. That still is done as a structure of perfect fourths in this chord here. But since it goes up to F in the bass, that means that the top 2 notes have to go down a smaller amount. So I was telling the singers, like, emphasize the small step in the top and middle parts, and then bass player in the low part sing a big semitone. So that was our way to make it sound, uniquely 17 equal, as opposed to the 12 equal version of that. We're just aiming different ways with notation we already know, and doing choral warm-ups where we sing whole steps and half steps, and neutral seconds, which is 2 out of 17, things like that. So, yeah.
I got the 17 pulled up, and it's on in your Sagittal Songbooks, page 86. I think
yeah, it is in the Sagittal Songbook, that's right.
So let's just back and forth a little, do that on the piano again?
Yeah, let's compare pianos. So here, I've got a 12 equal version. I'm going to do my 12 equal version, and then Jacob, you do 17, and we'll hear the smaller steps on the top and the larger step in the bottom, making it different. So here's the 12 equal. And here's 17. Yeah, that's an important difference. I can hear it for sure.
Play like the superset scale. So like I've got...
Yeah, sure. So in 12 equal, all the semitones are the same. So that would just be...
Yeah, dueling pianos.
Yeah.
That's great, yeah.
We're really getting polysystemic here. Awesome. Well, yeah. I really enjoyed singing that piece. In fact, it gave me, like, all the directing experience I needed to be confident that I could direct something if I ever needed to do it again. Because, well, if I can get people to sing in 17 equal without backing tracks, you know, there are harder things to do than that. But the piece is constructed so that the singers can hear each other and tune the fifths always. So that's quite nice. Although there are some, like, melodic, like, neutral thirds, things like that. Those can be a little hard, but once they're learned through rote and we discuss, like, where to aim, then things are a lot easier.
Melodic Neutral Thirds by Meredith Monk.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, I think we've only got one more piece on the agenda then. Sorry if I took up a little extra time, but I guess we're sort of, you know, we're sort of freely passing pieces around and discussing them and all of that. So this is kind of like a round table sort of thing. I think Jacob has one more piece to share.
Yes.
Yes. So go ahead and
turn your
pull that,
Sagittal Songbooks to page, what was it again?
21?
21. I Am Short. Andrew Heathwaite music, Terry Smith words. You'll find that... let me see if I can pull up the scale real quick. I might not have it handy, but that would be super nice if I did. Yeah, so what we have here is a 3-chord progression, 3-bar progression, 4 plus 4 plus 3 rhythmically, and I've tuned up the auto harp. Auto harps are just brilliant to have. They cost about $50 used on eBay, and then you have to get the little, tuning thingy, which is like $5 more.
That's great.
And sometimes they come with these giant felt picks. They're like a different sound, but I just have a regular guitar pick. So that's the first chord. We're kind of doing it transposed up from the Sagittal Songbook version. I just tuned the chords on the auto harp: C7, B flat major, and E7.
Okay.
I am short, I had a dream that I was big, I towered over everyone. So that thing is really interesting because you go, I towered over and that is 35 over 32, a small kind of neutral kind of second. They end up, because the bass is moving down by a 7, kind of by an 8/7, from 8 down to 7 in a way, and then you have the major third of the 7th, so the 5th harmonic of the 7th, 7 times 5 being 35 of the original.
Oh, I get it. So basically, it's a straight major third, but you have to notate the sagittal funny because it's a major third off of some note that's not like a perfect fifth away from.
Is a really cool design feature of sagittal where the downward arrow on the left side is straight, and that takes you down by the 5 comma, and then the right side takes you down by the 7 comma, so you get together the 35 comma.
Oh, wow. That's really cool. Yeah.
Now, there's lots of cool little built-in Easter eggs like that with sagittal. So... monster. I felt scarred and hideous. And that one's fun too. 2116. Great way to sing 2116. Hideous. And it's also, what would you call that in regular music theory?
I guess you could say it's a small perfect fourth.
Anticipation tone. Hideous.
Yes.
I was glad.
Yeah, because it starts in the wrong chord, right? I mean...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was glad. And that's why we have to write fe as the solfege. It's not, yeah, it's weird. I was glad to wake up and be small, so small I fit in the bottom of a teacup.
Okay.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So.
Oh, man.
So, yeah, it's like, I am short, I had a dream that I was big. I was on top. I felt scarred and hideous. I was glad to So there's an interesting, cool inner voice here too. Oh, do I have it right? Yeah, 48, 49, 50. 48th harmonic. So 49th harmonic, 7th of the 7th. So melodic, 49 to 48.
Where are you pointing to?
And the way you do that in sagittal is you just kind of look at the size of the accidental, and you see that the glad has 3 barbs, and so it's closer to a sesquitone, and the other one going up is closer to a semitone because it just has 2 barbs.
Okay. I guess that makes sense.
Is 49, 48, 48, 49, 50. So ta, and then 50 being 25th harmonic. So that's a great way to just like say, oh, I can sing microtones. It's the 5th of the 1, and then the 7th of the 7, and then the 3rd of the 3rd. The 5th.
Okay.
It's
Can you
the
say
5th
that
is the
again?
3rd, the 3rd is the 5th. Oh my goodness, the nomenclature is so messed up.
Yes, it is.
We need a reroute. Yeah, it's 48, 49, 50. That's the simplest way of saying it.
Actually, I think it makes sense to say the 5th of the 5th, the 7th of the 7th, and the 3rd of the... What's the...
3rd of the 3rd.
Yeah, the 3rd of the 3rd.
Okay, yeah.
You know, if it's written in B flat, and it's an F sharp, so it's like an augmented 6.
That's actually how I think of just intonation in my head when I'm like figuring out how it all kind of lays out. I'm thinking,
Yeah.
you know, this is the 5th of the 5th or the 7th of the 5th, or like when I first saw that 35 over 32 interval, I thought, okay, what is that? That's you got 35, which is 7 times 5, which means it's the 3rd of the 7th.
I think that explanation of I'm short was great. I don't know if I don't feel like I'm ready to sing it.
Yeah, me either.
Well, if you had an auto harp, you might feel differently.
Yeah, I'll bet I would.
That's probably
You know,
true.
I could practice this and sing it another time. I mean, I definitely want to learn most of the songs in the Sagittal Songbook. I just haven't had time.
Is there one that
but
we
yeah.
could, is there one we could go out on?
Actually,
I know
before we do
microscopic
that,
germs.
not that one. No.
I love that one so much.
Which one?
I was going to say
Microscopic germs.
Oh yeah, no.
I was going to say, speaking of learning stuff, Jacob, do you want to say a few things about what this year's Zen camp is going to be all
Yeah, and
about?
we can close on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Save the date, August 4th through 12th, 2019, for a little over a week-long experience in West Virginia, hosted by the Gesundheit Institute near Hillsboro. This year, they're the hosts of UnTwelve's camp offering. The emphasis is on the realization of composed music. So we're looking for composers to compose music in new tuning systems or relatively unexplored tuning systems. We're looking for performers who want to perform those kinds of things. And we're putting all together the invitation language, and we should have something out.
I think we're looking for people of different expertise levels, right? For
beginner, intermediate, advanced.
For both things.
We're working on a program, like a kind of a curriculum, to give you support up to the camp, whatever kind of support you need, whether it's technological, compositional, performance, like the production of exercises. We want to work together as a community to make microtones easier.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, okay, that's UnTwelve Camp. Thanks so much for coming on. Chris and Jacob, both part of UnTwelve. You can listen to those pieces in the show notes. We'll have the links in there. Be sure to follow us on social media. We're on Facebook and Twitter, and then our podcasts are on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify, as well as our host website, Libsyn. And we also have an episode release schedule that we are following for episodes from now on. We're going to be releasing episodes on the 12th of each month. It's for the irony, because, we hate 12, right? So it's easy to remember if the episodes are just released on the 12th of each month. So that's when the next episode will come out. Thank you so much, Chris and Jacob, for coming on. When we listen to the next episode, we will see you then.
Thank you.